Oh, okay. I think we can go ahead and get started with some introductions and just covering the agenda. We will be posting some quick links and some chat information in the chat, so all attendees should be able to access that. If you do want to ask a question, you're going to be using that Q&A box at the bottom of your toolbar. The chat will be disabled for this session just because we are looking at a large group of attendees. But if we want to go to the next slide, we can go over what we're going to be covering today in our agenda. We're going to go over a little bit about specific application requirements for international students, and then we have two of our lovely campus partners here, June and Sonia, here to talk a little bit about visa and immigration information, as well as the Global Ground Center for International Students. We're going to cover a little bit about campus resources, specific to being a master's student, also common resources and centers that you might be um, encountering with as a student here at Brown. And then we're going to cover a little bit about what it's like to live in Providence, as we do in every session, as it's really important to talk about as you are planning on deciding if Brown is the right place for your graduate studies or not. As always, we will also leave time at the end for a Q&A. We will also be answering questions possibly throughout the session, depending on if it's better for the group or saving it towards the end. So definitely submit those questions through your Q&A. You can also like other people's questions if you'd like to kind of boost them instead of repeating the same question, but completely up to you. We'll cover them all today and even more over email if that's kind of a better place to answer your question. But I did just want to lastly mention that this session will be recorded and we will be giving application fee waivers for all attendees. What that looks like is a really simple and easy process. It will be for all of our residential master's portfolio applications minus SOFIS, so the School of Public Health application system. Unfortunately, the application fee waiver is not applicable for that kind of program, but for all other res masters portfolio programs that we offer here at Brown, you will be getting an application fee waiver for this session. If after a day you have tried to start an application and you're not seeing it available in your applicant portal, you can email us at masters_events@brown.edu and then we can get that situated. Usually, if as long as you use the email that you registered for the session for to use for your application, it should be just a easy automatic process. But if not, you can always email us and we can get that situated. So if we want to go ahead to the next slide, we can start talking a little bit about specific application requirements for our international student community. So on the next slide, we'll be talking a little bit about the English proficiency exams in the form of the TOEFL or the IELTS. We get a lot of questions about if we accept other forms, other platforms like Duolingo, other aforementioned ones, and unfortunately we don't. TOEFL and the IELTS are the two recommended to approved English language proficiency exams that we accept. So what that looks like from a university minimum standpoint is we do have a recommended minimum score of 90 on the TOEFL and 7 on the IELTS. Really important to notice that, especially if you are in a STEM program, such as maybe biotech or biomed, just as an example, some of your program minimum scores are going to be significantly higher than the university minimum. And in that case, the program minimum is going to take preference over the university minimum. That is also just make sure that you're going to be a successful graduate student. So if you have any concerns about your TOEFL or IELTS scores ahead of applying, our recruitment team really value being able to, handle personal one-on-one kind of conversations like that. So we'd be happy to discuss if your TOEFL or IELTS score is not quite where it needs to be an admissible student. We can definitely provide that kind of advice for you in the application stage. We had a lot of questions also about who is required to take the TOEFL or IELTS exam. We have a list of countries here that is also available on pretty much all of our websites that show a list of countries that if you received a degree from there, that you are automatically exempt from having to submit the TOEFL or the IELTS. And that is, again, an automatic process. That's just as long as you submit the information correctly on the application, then it should just be easy breezy, not requiring a waiver of any sorts. We also don't actually offer waivers for the TOEFL or IELTS. So if you don't meet the criteria kind of labeled out on this slide, then unfortunately you would be required to submit the TOEFL or IELTS without the offer of a waiver. So a really easy way to kind of remember this is that we look at the your native language as well as the country that you received your bachelor's degree from. So if you have a native language such as Italian, but you received a degree and you received your degree from your bachelor's degree from Italy, because the curriculum was taught in both English and Italian, Victoria here, as an example, would be required to submit the TOEFL or the IELTS. If you attended a country and a school that taught only in English, then you should be exempt from it and having no issue from there. We do have our TOEFL school code listed here at the bottom, as well as available on a few of our other FAQ websites. So easy screenshotable slide to kind of just have all the information available for you right here. Again, any questions that come up, you can always email us at masters_events@brown.edu for that. And if we want to go to the next slide, some of our more in-depth requirements, especially if you're coming from, a country that was not taught in English, and that your transcripts are need to be translated or need to be evaluated. Good news is that you will not need to have a formal international transcript evaluation at the time of your application. So we understand that is an additional fee. We don't require that at the time of your application, only your unofficial transcripts that are translated. So hopefully that cuts down on a little bit of a cost barrier in applying because, of course, if you're applying to a number of different U.S. institutions, eventually this transcript evaluation will be required. We also only accept that evaluation from these three recommended platforms. So WES, ECE, or TEC. Those synonyms and acronyms those acronyms have changed a little bit over the years. So if you have any questions about that too, you can always reach out. And just a kind reminder too that your TOEFL and IELTS minimum scores are going to vary by your program, and that university minimum does not cover every program that we offer here. Additionally, a lot of our programs are moving away from GRE requirements, so we definitely recommend beyond the kind of TOEFL and IELTS minimum scores that you are paying attention to your program application requirements and not submitting items that may not bear any sort of value onto your application. So some programs recommend the GRE requirement just kind of to boost your application, and some of them will not review it at all. So we will also be covering an application, some of these kind of like best tips and pro tips for applying and building your best master's application in about a month in an application workshop. So any sort of questions that you might have about that, there's an opportunity that we're going to be hosting an event that covers building your best application in a workshop kind of style. So if we want to go to the next slide, I will be passing it over to Sonia.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Holly. My name is Sonia Paulson. I'm one of the assistant directors for International Student Services. The OISSS is divided by caseload for different advisors. I'm actually the PhD advisor, but our master specific is out of office today. But I'm happy to be here and to share with y'all some important application information from the perspective of our office and what's required to begin your program at Brown in F or J status. So the next slide is going to talk about some visa and immigration information specific. So if you are admitted to one of the master's programs at Brown that are in person or residential, and you're a non-US citizen, you will need to obtain an F or a J visa. The only exception to that are Canadian citizens. So if you hold a Canadian passport, you won't need the visa foil, the visa sticker, but you will need the documentation associated with that, the Form I-20 for F status, or the Form DS-2019 for J1 status. So part of the issuance of those immigration documents, the I-20 and the Form DS-2019, are finances. Brown needs to know how you're able to support yourself while you're here in Providence, and essentially who's funding your degree, where the source of funding is. So part of the financial certification, the materials are the evidence of finances. Oftentimes that's a bank statement or a letter, evidence of scholarships. It often is multiple sources. When you get that total sum, whatever your program's total tuition is for 1 year, how you come up with it. So as listed there, tuition fees, health insurance, living expenses for 1 year. We do have to see that liquid, so that's why bank statement is listed there. If you're unclear about like what will comprise your finances, you can always upload things and then the admissions team will, question or get back to you if that's something that doesn't meet the criteria. But in general, it needs to be liquid. It needs to be accessible. So a bank statement, checking or savings, sometimes a certificate of deposit is possible, but for that first year of attendance is required. And then, of course, your most important identification document, your passport, the identification page, the biographic page, and make sure that that's valid. Per immigration regulations, it should be valid minimum 6 months into the future. And you should be monitoring when it's about to expire and timing that accordingly. If you need to renew it while you're home, while you're traveling home for holiday breaks, it's usually easiest to do so in your home country. And then the admission letter is another key piece of your admission information. And then some other potentially relevant or required materials are the financial sponsorship declaration form. This would be showing if you have a parent or relative that is willing, to support you while you're here. They would be signing off an agreement stating as such. I noticed in the chat someone asked, what if you attend another U.S. school? So if you're coming from another U.S. F1 issuing institution, that would be the I-20 transfer form, keeping your SEVIS ID intact from the other school. And then we also request that you upload a copy of that active U.S. visa, the F1 or J1 visa. And then if you're coming with dependents, with a spouse or children, we'd also need their information before we can issue I-20s or DS 2019s for them. Again, my office is the Office of International Student and Scholar Services, and we offer advising that's relevant to the immigration and visa process. So if you have questions about obtaining or renewing, we're your people. Work permission, what's possible in the United States when you're here as a student, what isn't, what restrictions there are, and I will be talking about that shortly. Orientation, cultural adjustment, and personal matters that are related to your immigration status. We do have a general email, oisss@brown, and then you can schedule appointments online with your case-specific advisor. So that would be with Jennifer. Once you're admitted, we recommend you wait until you know for sure you're coming to Brown before you schedule that appointment with us. Next slide, please. Yeah, and keep your questions coming in the chat. It's really helpful to see what I am able to chat about or to address and what are more case specific. So for those of you that appreciate a good visual, like I do, here's a really nice timeline for the visa immigration timeline. So your first step is to be admitted, receive that offer of admission for which program you're hoping to attend. And then you'll need to complete the enrollment form and pay the enrollment deposit by the deadline that's specific to your program. And then really importantly, this is in the middle so people don't forget, activate your Brown account and your email. That to your Brown email is where our office sends the information on how to get your I-20. We do every year get questions from students, where's my I-20? If you haven't uploaded or if you haven't created and activated your Brown email, you won't get the instructions on how to do that. So that's a really important step. Activate that, and then from there, you'll receive an email invitation from us to complete the financial certification process in the OISSS Gateway portal. So that's the repository, the online system where you upload your passport, you upload those bank statements. It's a safe mechanism to do so. And then as you'll see, there's different timelines for the different entities involved in that to review everything. So you're uploading everything, then the master's enrollment team is reviewing everything, making sure everything's accurate. From there, OISSS will provide you with the immigration document, the I-20 or the DS 2019 form. Once you receive that and you have your unique SEVIS ID, you will pay the SEVIS fee, the I-901 fee. That is $220 for J1 students and $350 US dollars for F1. You'll pay that and you'll schedule your nearest interview appointment at the US Embassy or US Consulate. Choose first available so you can have ample processing time. And then you'll attend your interview in your best dressed and best self, and you'll obtain your visa, and then you'll come to Providence. And the report directly to OISSS, we do have an online registration process where you'll report you've arrived and you'll report where you're living so we can register your SEVIS record as active. Next slide, please. Yep, so this is me, and this next one, if you can skip to the next one, just reiterates more about the visa application. So just a few other details that I may have missed. After you're admitted and you receive the I-20 or DS 2019 from our office, it's electronically issued. So that's great news. Everybody used to have to kind of wait weeks for it to come by mail. So you will be receiving it electronically to your Brown email, and it'll have a DocuSign signature from Jennifer Dressen, from my colleague. And then with that new I-20, or the DS 2019, you'll use that information to complete the DS 160 form and schedule your interview. You'll have paid the I-901, the SEVIS fee, you'll have completed the DS 160, and you'll wait for your interview. You have the issued visa, and then you should plan your travel and arrival to US. Now, this last line, timelines and challenges may include processing times, such as China or delays. As you may have heard, there is reduced staffing or shortages at a lot of consulates worldwide. So again, we recommend once you receive that documentation, you do your best to schedule as early as possible, and then be in contact with our office if your visa is delayed. And by delayed, I mean if it goes through administrative processing, which are security clearances to review your case. Sometimes we see those for more technologically sensitive fields of study. Okay, next slide, please. Maintaining status, work authorization. I know there were some questions about this. How can I work in the US? So per F1 and J1 regs, but most of you will be coming as an F1 student. While classes are in session, you are permitted to work part-time. It's capped off. The maximum is 20 hours per week of on-campus work. You can work anywhere on the Brown campus. It could be in your department, it could be in the cafeteria. If Brown University is remitting that paycheck, you're allowed to be working maximum 20 hours per week while classes are in session. During winter break, you can work full-time. So you could work, 40 hours, whatever the department on campus is allowing you to. And so again, payment has to be issued from Brown University. Your pay stub or your bank account would show Brown University is paying me X amount for that to be considered on-campus employment. For the few of you who plan to be J1 students, all employment on campus has to be reported to OISSS, and that's done through the Gateway portal. So there's a bit more information on the next slide about working in the US, since there's always lots of questions about that. Yes, so work authorization continued. So Sonia, I want to work off campus. Can I do that? The short answer is maybe. It kind of depends on what program you're in. So for off-campus work authorization for an entity or employer that's not Brown University, you need to think about, where are your feet? Are you physically on US soil? Are you back in your home country? So off-campus employment is not allowed, not permitted during the first academic year unless your program has a requirement of that. So some master's programs have required internships or co-ops the first term. So you will want to be cognizant and cautious about if that applies to you or not. So some options for F1 students are curricular practical training, or CPT, and that again It varies by which degree you're looking at and the program. And that's authorization issued by OISSS for employment that's required or integral for your degree program. Optional practical training is primarily reserved for postgraduate after you've finished your program. We do have a helpful video series online. You can simply Google OPT, optional practical training at Brown, and then you'll be linked to the link for that. And that does feature Jennifer, myself, and our colleague. And that's authorization that's issued by USCIS for employment related to your field of study. It has a 12-month maximum per degree. And if you're in a STEM field, you can apply again for an extension, an additional 24 months. If you come as a J1 student, that has kind of a parallel to OPT called academic training, and that it must be related to your field of study. All of these options have to be related to your field of study, CPT, OPT, and academic training. And that has an 18-month maximum for J students. So I'm not going to touch on the other piece because this is all master's students. But if you have questions about any of these things, you're welcome to schedule an appointment. And I know Jennifer does a detailed orientation at the beginning of the fall for everybody admitted to the program. And then finally, in red, it says working without authorization is a serious violation. If you ever have a question, about some activity, whether it constitutes work or not, please ask in advance and we can clarify what your options are. Thanks.
Thanks, Sonia. I just had a few questions in the chat here if we wanted
Sure.
to answer them.
Okay, yeah.
Just to kind of confirm for the group, is this the financial information is needed for the visa application and not just upon enrollment? It's not as a requirement for enrolling into the university. The financial information is for the visa application.
That's correct. Yes. So you, you can apply without, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can apply for the master's program without submitting that documentation. We need to see it to issue the Form I-20 for the F1 visa or the J visa.
Exactly. Yep. So that's why we talk
Thanks.
about it right now as early as the application phase is to be aware that even if it's not required to be admitted, it would be required to actually
Mhm.
come here as a student. So just something that you can plan proactively as you're planning your application.
Thanks.
And just to kind of cover your for curricular practical training, does Brown offer day one CPT?
Yeah, so to my knowledge, no. There are some schools that do, but the only CPT that we offer in the first semester would be for a program that has a mandated internship course where CPT is required. And, that all has to be set up. To my knowledge, no, we don't.
Thank you. And question here, what if I already have a visa and I'm in the United States, do I still need to submit the financial documents?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yes. So if you have a valid visa from another school, it remains valid. That's fantastic. We would ask for a copy of that for our portfolio in the OISSS Gateway. But your question was about the finances. So yes, because we're then switching your CVIS ID, it's held at a different university. It's being transitioned to Brown. Now it's a whole new set of numbers, right? It's a different amount of tuition at Brown than it was at your other school. We still need to know who's sourcing or funding your time here. Thank you that's a great question. Thank you.
That's a great question. Thanks. Um, I had two questions that are similar to this. My I-20 was has expired a couple months ago, but my visa is still valid for 4 more years. Do I still need to pay CVIS?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I assume that means the CVIS fee, the
Yes.
$350 I-901 fee. If the CVIS ID number stays valid or active, it doesn't go dormant and closes, then you don't have to pay that fee again. But it sounded like you said your I-20 was ended a few
Expired.
months.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would need to look into that a bit more if you mean like now you're outside the US. So it would really depend. We can only a transfer in has to happen within 5 months of the last date of attendance at the previous school. So either, you're done with the earlier program and no longer than 5 months have passed between programs, or you have like your undergrad plus OPT, and then there's again no longer than 5 months between the end of OPT and the start of the new program. So it's hard for me to address that affirmatively or definitively without knowing exactly your case, but hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia, for that insight. I do want to just kind of warn those in the Q&A that if you do have kind of more personal or specific kind of visa requirements, Sonia might not be able to answer kind of in this session, but I do think some of these questions I've just seen them kind of repeated, and that's why I'm having her answer them. But if you do have kind of more in-depth kind of personal circumstances, I think that it would probably benefit to kind of talk to someone via email and outside the session. But
I
um,
do see one in there that I can address with,
yeah,
is it
please.
allowed to apply while on a B visa and then switch? Yeah, you can apply for your program at Brown if you're in the United States on a B1, tourist or business visa, but then the expectation is that you would have started the program at Brown in F or J status.
Um, I think that kind of covers it for visa right now. This is more about kind of volunteer opportunities. What if I work outside the university, but it is not receiving pay, aka like volunteer work? That does not count as employment, hence no working hours limit. Is that correct? That is correct. But if any sort of pay is involved, that would be a concern of needing to be paid and have that be kind of tracked by the U.S. Department of Treasury. So
Yeah.
you can definitely work volunteer, but if you're getting paid in any sort of which way or form, that would need to be logged on your visa status.
Yeah, if I can just piggyback on
Please.
that, I would say, yeah, you want to tread cautiously or on what's considered volunteer work. We really don't want to misstep and be in any place where you're violating someone's labor laws, like, oh, I'll just volunteer in the lab, I'll do it for free.
Mm,
That could come back to bite you and the employer. In other words, if it's in your electronic presence, like LinkedIn, I'm doing this or that, you want to make sure you have authorization and everything is consistent across the board. So I would want to tease out a bit more. What do you mean by volunteer? And is it strictly like humanitarian or altruistic in nature? Thanks.
yeah, thank you, Sonia, for that addition. Sometimes, yeah, volunteer can be kind of just a mask for trying to gain experience in some area or not, which is not at all something that we want to bar you from, but also we want to make sure that you protect your visa requirements and that you're going to be here legally.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
And I do see just a couple of questions broadly about, and something that I am remiss that I did mention at the beginning of the session. A lot of international students do assume that they are barred from specific scholarship opportunities or that you have to do extra steps to be applicable for merit scholarship opportunities. A lot of scholarship opportunities, regardless of if you're an international student or domestic student or not, they are extremely limited. So being an international student does not mean that there's any sort of extra barrier or extra step that you would need to apply or be eligible for merit-based scholarships. If you're admitted into a program, many of our programs that do offer scholarships, they are determining your eligibility based on either your academics or yeah, the strength of your application. So it really has nothing to do with your international status necessarily. But with that being said, you will be eligible for scholarships. They're just extremely limited. They're as limited as they are for domestic students. So I just do see a lot of kind of program specific questions about funding right now. And it's just really, really helpful to understand that they are extremely limited. You will be eligible as an international student, but and there's no cap necessarily. None of the scholarships are ever going to be really full ride scholarships, as you might see like in an undergraduate setting. It's usually the price of maybe one or two classes. So, um, yes, if you have any kind of more questions about program-specific funding opportunities, you can email us and we can connect you with your program or find some information online if you have not found that already. And I don't see any other kind of visa questions, so I think that we can go ahead to the next slide and let kind of June jump in.
Greetings, everyone. It's lovely to be here with you, and I've to my panelists, I've enjoyed hearing all the resources and information. So my name is June Spencer. I'm the Global Brown Program Manager, and I work kind of taking a look at all the resources that fall under the umbrella of Global Brown. And one is the Global Brown Center for International Students. And so we do have an on-campus lounge called the Globe. And so we would definitely invite everyone to come and take a look at that. And it's kind of a second home away from home in a sense for a lot of our international undergraduate and graduate students. They provide a wide variety of programming, community programs that allow students to get away from campus to Narragansett Beach. We're in New England in the United States, and there's a lot of seasonal related trips. So in New England in the fall, there's apple picking and pumpkin picking and alpaca farms. And there are these kind of day trips where the students will plan all of this themselves. That's one of the things at Brown that we really appreciate, that it's very student driven. So as an incoming graduate student, you also have agency to talk to our teams about initiatives that you're interested in. So when I mention any of these resources, particularly with the Global Brown Center for International Students, please keep in mind that these are all student-generated programs and ideas. So aside from their community programs, they also offer a wide variety throughout the year of cultural programs and cross-cultural conversations. If you go to the Global Brown Center for International Student website, you'll also see a few links related to their graduate student programs. So there's a Well Connect series and there's an Empowered Conversation series. You can click on links to learn a little bit more about those programs. There's international mentoring, international education. So with that, there's the physical space, but then there's also a lot of programming that's ongoing and very fluid that is available to you. Next slide, please. So this is a slide here for you to kind of see the Globe Lounge, and there's also many spaces on campus. This is just one of the moments, and I can take a look at this right away and see that this was one of the cross-cultural conversations, which ends up being a really rich cross-section of, represented identities and traditions, and there's usually a very focused topic per each element of the series. So it gets pretty lively and really thought-provoking. Another element of the Global Brown Center for International Students is student advocacy, which is really big at Brown. I think we consider that a very paramount element of the work. Okay, next slide. So Global Brown is really an umbrella that encompasses not only several offices on campus, but within about 15 offices on campus that are, whether they're not necessarily international, there are Global Brown affiliates within each department. So whether it's, you know, international students and scholar services may be an office, but we have college advising and we have the graduate school, we have English language learning, we have Brown travel, career counseling. So if students were to come to me, say, with an issue or a matter that they wanted to sort out, we have a really large collective of staff across the whole university that are immediately available to take a look at what you need. So another office that's, its own office, but in this umbrella is the English language, the Sheridan Center. This is a really, I encourage everyone on the call to take a moment and look at these individual websites, because if you go to the Sheridan Center website, you'll see it for English language, all the programs. It's incredible what they offer. So they have a myriad of workshops that are available throughout the year, whether they're recorded or whether they're live. Individual language support, where it could be there's self driven programs as well as one-on-one. One of the most vastly popular programs that they run on campus is the Conversation Partners, and it's where individual undergraduate or graduate students partner with staff members, and it's purely conversation, and it's just to practice conversational English if that's something that you'd like to do. In a deeper dive, there is advising and programs to help with academic writing, with program development, resume writing, and honestly, the list goes on. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at that website as well as the websites here. So I think my main takeaway would be um, that many years ago, before the Office of Global Brown or the Office of Global Engagement really had shaped up to be what it was. One of our past provosts, um, who was a real visionary and I think and had noticed this graduate student. This is an anecdote, but it was a real story about a graduate student that was on campus and couldn't find, this was many years ago, couldn't find where to get a notary public, which was a way to document or kind of officiate a document, had tried different offices. And the idea was that there would be no international student here that wouldn't have a wide scope of individuals immediately available to help put them where they need to go so that you don't have to run through the maze of not only coming to a new campus in a new city, but also having to figure out this university. So that was well over 10 years ago, and I think we've come a long way. And now I'd say that, when we have our kind of semi-annual Global Brown gatherings, all of these individuals are looking for international students and looking for questions they might have so that they can reconnect back to anyone on the team and hopefully make the process so much more seamless. So I encourage you to take a look at our resources and 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 really can feel from my perspective that we've got a really warm team looking to support you. Thank you.
Thank you, June. I do see a question in the chat here that I think is maybe better situated for Sonia, but I do recommend anyone in the chat here to ask any questions for June and Sonia while we have them here with us today. Do Brown Master students continue to receive support from the Global Center after graduating? Example, helping with questions and documentation while on OPT/STEM OPT? If so, then for how long?
Yeah, great question. So when you're on OPT or STEM extension OPT, you still are under Brown's F1 sponsorship. So yes, we actually, some of our like most frequent clients, if you will, or the people that we chat with via email or Zoom are students on OPT or STEM OPT. So yes, we welcome questions and we're we want to stay in touch with you. Thanks.
And I would also add that in our career advising center at Brown, that's another, I think, that students connect with early on while they're here, and that continues on because one thing I always say is once you're part of Brown, you're always part of Brown, and the network really is pretty wide outside the years of graduation. So I think that that's something that you could really tap into.
Thank you both for those for the insight. So if we want to go to the next slide, we're going to go a little bit more into broadly being a student at Brown, especially a master's student, maybe coming from far, maybe coming to America for the first time to study here. So if we want to go to the next slide, we'll kind of go at our more common centers and offices that you'd be kind of interacting with as a master's student. So first and foremost, we have our Center for Master Student Excellence team, which is basically our student affairs and professional development services team that is specific to master students. So that is a whole team of individuals that is specific to our master student population. So covering anything from academic support to career support to personal, crisis support or needing emergency funding. Our Center for Master Students Excellence team is going to be your best people for anything. Go to any sort of, if you have any questions about where to go to on campus for a particular issue, problem, or something that you're just curious or interested in, that team would be the perfect people to kind of go to first, and they'd be able to lead you to the either right campus partners like Sonia or like June. So especially as a master's student, you would be required to obtain student health insurance. That's required for all students studying on campus here. So that you can actually obtain, any sort of medical assistance, or if you run into any sickness, that is part of the reason why we do require student health insurance. If you already have health insurance that covers you, then you would be waived from having to obtain additional insurance. But between the Student Health and Wellness Services team, Office of Chaplains of Religious Life, our Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and the Sheridan Center for Teaching and Learning, which June had just kind of provided some insight about. These are some of our more common centers and offices for master's students. And for our next slide, some of our more identity centers. So depending on if you identify with a certain um, gender ideology, or you are a first generation college student and undocumented, if there's not a student group, then there's an identity center that is working towards building community, building belonging, really encouraging skill building, skill sharing, and also just socio-emotional kind of bonding while you're a student at Brown. So especially as a master's student, you're here for the shortest period of time, usually only for a year or 2 years. So we always recommend really starting from day one of orientation, which is required for all international students. But starting with that networking, starting with building connections as soon as day one, so that you can really have a great experience being a student, and especially outside of class, since we understand that your personhood is not just who you are in the classroom or the kind of amazing work that you'll do at Brown, but also who you are outside the classroom and how you have fun, how you engage with other people outside of a kind of academic setting. And I'm just going to pause here to see if there's any questions. I'm going to save this one question that says how do international students typically engage with the Providence community outside of campus? So I'm going to cover that in a couple different slides, but I'm also going to invite June and Sonia to invite their perspective too, because they do work within some of these identity centers and campus offices that do a lot of cross collaboration for programming for students. So just more on that in a little bit. But on our next slide, I do want to just show, and just kind of a reiteration of things that we've already been talking about, is really the umbrella of support as a student at Brown, but particularly an international student. I had talked about our Center for Master's Students Excellence team, which provides academic counseling and career services. Just to kind of name a few services that they cover, that's not limited to the universe of support that they can offer you as a student here. The Sheridan Center for Teaching and Learning, which does offer English language support, workshops for tutoring, writing center that helps you kind of build your writing proficiency if English is not your native language and you need help kind of building that skill. The Sheridan Center is a excellent center for being able to build on those skills. And then just in general, as a student support resources, we have 24/7 administrator on-call services. So that's being able to talk to a live person 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, depending on what issue you might be experiencing or assistance that you might be needing. Some of our more broad campus partners, like student accessibility services, they can help you with navigating any sort of accommodations that you might need for academic learning, or any sort of personal accommodations that might be needed to help you be a successful student at Brown, and also make sure that we are meeting you where you're at with any sort of accommodations or necessities that you need for your learning. As well as counseling and psychological services. Obviously, mental health is a huge resource that we want to make sure that you are taken care of, and that there are a number of opportunities to take care of that, either through health and wellness services, through meditation groups that various either student groups or even the Office of the Chaplains hosts every week, if not every month. As well as, CAPS also offers individual sessions, group sessions, and also crisis support. The Office of International Equity and Diversity, who does a lot more work about reporting and also looking at issues of bias across campus. So they would also be a great support for you in the meantime. And we already mentioned health and services, so I'm just going to pause here and see if there's any questions kind of related to this at this time. And it doesn't look like it. So I think we can go to the next slide and kind of talk a little bit about some of these questions we have in the Q&A. So what are the pros and cons of studying and living in Providence? I think honestly, as far as any cons are concerned, I cannot speak as a current international student or someone who's come to Providence from far away, but I can say that because Providence is a huge, has a huge immigrant and international community that, and it's also considered what is considered a sanctuary city, that there is a lot of acceptance, a lot of welcoming of international people and especially students in a city like Providence. So I think that's a huge pro, especially if you are coming from outside the United States, is that there is a lot of diversity in a small city like Providence, especially with our food and culture. But just in general, there is a huge Portuguese population, there's a huge Cuban community, Cape Verdean. So as far as being particularly an international student, I would consider that to be a huge pro, is that Providence is a highly diverse city, and that it is also very welcoming towards other international students. So we have Brown is not the only college in Providence. There's URI, there's RIC. So there's a number of different international students, not just from Brown, that are living and working around the city. So we see a lot of belonging and acceptance there. As far as, opportunities for social engagement, for building community that are either free or low cost, a lot of that, even if you never left foot off of Brown's campus, you would have an abundance of opportunities to build that community, to take part of any social programming that might be specific to master's students, that might be open to all undergrad, master's, and doctoral students. Um, so I'd say that's a huge pro is being able to, again, without even needing to spend much money or to set foot off campus, there's an opportunity there to network, to make friends, to have fun. Um, but then particularly because you are in the middle of Providence, and we'll kind of go over some in a few slides, we'll have a map of Providence, just kind of give you an idea of the layout and how tiny the city is and how Providence really I'm sorry, Brown is really in the heart of Providence's city. So that really helps with kind of having fun things to do that are outside of campus and also kind of taking part of the larger Rhode Island community. Um, so I would love June or Sonia, because we did have a question earlier. How do international students typically engage with the Providence community outside of campus?
That's a great question. This is June Spencer speaking. One thing that immediately comes to mind is there's this nonprofit organization about a 2 minutes walk from main campus called the International House of Rhode Island. And it's a wonderful artery to connect with many different communities on campus in Providence. And while with what Holly was saying is I feel like because Providence is a walkable city and it's something where it's easy to connect and reach out. I think with a little bit of research, while I don't very directly work with outside engagement, except for when we're encouraging or networking with scholars or international students through events, the communities around are like an arm's reach away. And I think if you were interested in a specific community, if it was from, say, like another group of individuals from, say, your region of the world, the International House of Rhode Island would be a great first step in connecting. So I think that would be my recommendation as a first step.
Yeah, thank you, June. And I will say that I think Brown is huge on volunteer and also community engagement in general. So you will see in Today at Brown or events at Brown that there's a lot of just campus community posting about if you want to engage in true volunteer work with like cleaning up a farm or with helping, Providence school district children with tutoring. Like there are opportunities for engaging with volunteer work with the community if you are looking for kind of community service or giving back to the broader Providence community. Brown is huge about that because we have seen our relationship with the city and we really want to protect that and honor that. So our bond with the city is pretty close. And I think unique to other major metropolitan cities and also kind of large Ivy universities. So beyond kind of just volunteer work or having fun, as a student, you have the opportunity to have free ridership on the Rhode Island public transportation system, which connects you to all of Rhode Island and also to nearby airports, to Boston, to also New York City based on the train lines. So based on, especially as a master's student, you probably are a little bit more mature. You're probably going to be living a little further off campus or also having social needs that are a little different than your undergraduate counterparts, which is great. But especially, I think a lot of students have a lot of fun being a student in Providence because it is not one of those traditional college-like cities. It is kind of mature. It is not like New York City that is just kind of always bustling. It can be a little quiet, and also with a lot of hidden gems, depending on kind of June mentioned this a little bit, is it's about really where you are finding kind of these opportunities. Even as people who've lived in Providence their whole life, there's always kind of another like plug or tip or trip that are or an organization or a volunteer opportunity that you've never heard of before, but that's been around for 20, 30 years. It's something I hear all the time with Rhode Island is just it's about who you know and how to find it. But as far as available communities for international students and also for students of all real identities and belonging, that Providence has a lot of opportunities for people of different belongings and identities. And I think that we can go into the next slide and talk a little bit more about living in Providence. And if we want to go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about graduate student housing. So something that's also really important to consider as you are applying to Brown and deciding on if Brown, Providence, all aforementioned pieces are kind of the right fit for you. And it seems to be checking off all your boxes and needs for what you're looking for in a graduate school and also graduate school community. It's really important to kind of mention at this point, even if it's a little further out on maybe several months away from something that you need to truly be worried about, but graduate student housing is extremely limited for master's students. There is probably between River House and affiliated housing, which are two Brown-owned graduate student housing opportunities. They are technically on campus and about a 10-minute walk away from our campus center. So really easily walkable and accessible depending on where you might find a housing placement with these two avenues. But we do want to just mention that as much as it is extremely limited, that you do have priority as a first year graduate student. So what that means is that when applications open in April or late April, early May, you're going to be given priority and preference as a first year graduate student. What that means is that unfortunately, even if I think out of the probably close to 300 units total between the River House and affiliated housing opportunities, that we have almost 3,000 graduate students that come to study with us, and that's including domestic and international. Right now, our international and domestic mix is usually about 50-50 right now, and it varies per program. But with that being said, with only about 300 units and about 3,000 students, more than half of our students do not find housing opportunities through River House or affiliated housing. They find opportunities through private landlords, private real estate opportunities, and we do have some community-based opportunities like Brown University off campus. We have identified partnerships with either landlords or through various real estate companies that work a lot with our students and are familiar with especially international students who might be applying for apartments for the first time or not familiar with the landscape of looking for housing in America for the first time. So we totally understand that learning curve is not intuitive at all. So there are opportunities, again, through this graduate student listserv, which is basically a giant email list that you can connect with people looking for housing, looking for furniture, looking for childcare, maybe even looking just to start a community group. But between, these kind of aforementioned sources, we have Facebook groups, Craigslist, Zillow, HotPads, there's opportunities to to definitely get housing in Providence. It probably will not look like River House or affiliated housing. It'll be an apartment that is probably going to be around campus or around the Jewelry District and College Hill, which is our two kind of main neighborhoods that Brown's campus bisects on. So we get a huge amount of questions about graduate student housing, and especially for international students who are maybe not be familiar with the landscape of Rhode Island or Providence. I'll say that because it is such a small city, I think that it can be a little overwhelming at first to navigate, but also between, the bus, between it being super walking friendly, that it is easy to get a lay of the land pretty quickly, even if you don't have a car. Many international students, especially um, given cost kind of barriers and the short period of time that you are on campus, that some decide to not obtain a car or to bring their car over or to go through the process of getting an international license, which many of our students get by just fine using the resources like the shuttles, using Lyft or Uber to get around. To either, again, if they're living a little further off campus, that is kind of in terms of Brown and Providence terms, really just right down the road and really more accessible than maybe you would see in a larger city like Boston or New York. And I see a question here. You mentioned the city is relatively quiet. Is private housing listed in safe or rather bustling places? So Providence, again, is a kind of typical city. You're going to have some parts that are going to be a little nicer and a little bit more expensive to live in, and some that might be a little bit underdeveloped and also maybe less safe to walk in at night. I'll say in general, especially around Brown's campus, you have the opportunity to lean on the Department of Public Safety for safe rides home and also for just in general having any sort of help that you might need, that there's Brown University police around all the time. And also um, housing is really you're gonna find housing in every neighborhood in Providence. But the Brown River House and affiliated housing, River House is really in a beautiful building right on the Providence River, and affiliated housing is um, basically an umbrella term for a number of rental houses or properties that are mostly in the College Hill area. So those two areas are, I think, relatively quiet. River House probably is a little bit more bustling, but the city is so small that some streets are really loud and then the next street are really quiet. So hard to answer that question fully. I hope that I covered that. And yeah, so as far as like, just kind of keep going back to this like pros and cons of studying and living in Providence, I think that based on the public transportation system, which I think we can probably just go to the next slide and I can show yeah, exactly, the bus kind of route that goes from, you can see Down City, which is considered downtown, and also the Jewelry District to Fox Point and College Hill. This is our daytime connector bus, and it connects on a really 10 to 15-minute loop between furthest points on campus. So even if you're not comfortable walking or don't have that accessibility to walk often, you can definitely lean on the Brown University shuttle bus to get you around campus. And then furthermore, the RIPTA bus, as mentioned prior, you have free ridership as a student at Brown just with your Brown ID, and that can connect you to further parts of New England, like TF Green Airport, which is just 20 minutes south of Providence in Rhode Island, in Warwick, Rhode Island, sorry. And then the next kind of closest international airport in Boston, Massachusetts at Boston Logan Airport. Again, many of our students rely on these forms of transportation to not need a car, to not have to worry about getting another parking permit or parking around or car insurance and all aforementioned pieces. So really helpful to know about how accessible Providence is as a city and how it connects you to also nearby cities so that you can kind of explore a little bit, also either for free or for low cost. And yeah, really great question in the chat. Is graduate student housing guaranteed or is it offered on a first come, first served basis? So yes, whole really, really important. Not guaranteed. It is not guaranteed. The priority is given on a first come, first served basis, but it is highly limited and not guaranteed. And just to kind of repeat, because we had mentioned this prior in this session before, Brown does not require transcripts evaluated before. Well, the transcripts do need to be evaluated in English so that our team can read them. But as far as evaluated, like full transcript evaluation that you would see from WES, ECE, or TCE, that is not going to be required upon admission. It will be required upon enrollment. So if you decide to enroll, you would need to submit that transcript evaluation. And um, question about looking at job opportunities before I receive my visa. Sorry, I meant to answer this earlier, but you can start looking for job opportunities before you receive your visa. Unfortunately, you will probably not receive a lot of traction for actually applying or for getting very far in that search, especially if you're looking at Brown specific sources. So if you have not submitted, depending on what stage of the application that you're at right now, or if you've already received your admissions decision, a lot of times we see a lot of job opportunities open around August or September, usually with that traditional first day of school for fall classes. So we get that question a lot, is people trying to be proactive and look for opportunities as soon as possible. You can certainly look for them, but you might not be able to apply for them if you have not submitted your enrollment deposit. You don't have access to our Workday platform. And also, if you're not currently in the United States. So, some departments, especially if they're looking for like TAs or GAs or just looking for like a salesperson for the bookstore, they would really prefer you to be either on campus and meet with you to kind of determine if the job is the right fit for not. And it would be hard to kind of obtain that job virtually. So that's just kind of a insider information that you can definitely start looking at jobs, but as far as maybe applying for them or being seriously considered for them, it might not be possible until you're really on campus and really making those connections after orientation. See a couple other kind of application focus questions here. I would love if I know that we're kind of a few minutes over time, so I will definitely let Sonia and June go since a lot of these other questions seem to be more masters in general. So I just want to really, if we want to go to the next slide and just show our contact information, um, we can continue kind of answering these questions. But if we want to go to the next slide, Emma, or next two, and just show our contact information. Thank you. So I am just going to be skipping some questions about a specific application or program specific questions. And I think the last question I'll answer here, do a lot of big tech companies have offices or outposts in Providence? Do students generally share spaces with other students for housing? It is possible to share spaces with other students for housing. I think oftentimes we have big houses and big apartment complexes in Providence. So typically you are going to be seeing like a roommate sharing opportunity. We do have roommate matching services through Brown-owned housing and also River House, but anything outside of that, you'd be looking at the graduate student listserv. You'd be looking at Facebook groups for people also looking for roommates. So that is pretty common, especially with the cost of living in Providence. A lot of people try to save money by rooming with other students, so that's fairly typical and common. And as far as big tech companies in Providence, that's really more for Boston. I don't have any on the top of my head any sort of big tech companies that have offices or outposts in Providence. That's more common with a city like Boston. But thank you all for joining. If you have any other questions that have come up from here, you have our email in the chat. Thank you, Bryce and Emma, for furiously taking care of the Q&A in the background, and thank you all for joining. If you have any questions beyond here, you have our emails. You can reach out to us anytime, and we hope to connect with you again soon. Take care. Bye.